Good afternoon. Welcome to our closing plenary for the 2023 annual meeting of the Global Future Councils. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, partners, and friends, it has been a very intense 2 days with conversations that have gone deep into specific topics around, for example, the care economy, for example, the future of growth, for example, AMR that we all heard about in that opening session, for example, synthetic biology. And it has also been a time where we have connected in cross-cutting issues, big picture topics that have come up in every single council or that are points of contention or challenge or dialogue between different councils. Across those 2 days, we've had lots of passion, we've had lots of insights, and most importantly, we've had respectful dialogue that builds upon each other's insights. And I hope that the takeaways have been such that we've all walked away learning more for ourselves, learning more for our organizations, and being able to contribute to the causes and challenges that we came here to solve 2 days ago. Now, there have been so many highlights that I couldn't possibly summarize them all, but luckily we have a very esteemed panel that can tell us more about some of those big cross-cutting topics, but also some of those very specific areas that were covered over the last couple of days. Let me briefly introduce my panelists. They all have very illustrious biographies, and so hopefully they can tell us a little bit more about themselves when we get to that part of the conversation. I'm joined by Lauren Woodman, who is the Chief Executive Officer of DataKind USA, and she's the co-chair of the Global Future Council on the Future of Data Equity. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
Badr Jafar, Chief Executive Officer, Crescent Enterprises, and a member of the Global Future Council on the Future of Philanthropy for Climate and Nature, and also co-leading the Gaia initiative. Welcome, Badr. Neely Gilbert is next, Vice Chairwoman for Carbon Direct USA, and also at the David Rockefeller Fund, and a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, and a member of the Council on the Future of Philanthropy and for Climate and Nature as well. Reshma Sojani, founder and Chief Executive Officer of Moms First, previously founder and Chief Executive Officer of Girls Who Code, and co-chair of the Global Future Council on the Care Economy. And last but not least, our esteemed host, His Excellency Omar Sultan Al-Olama, Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence, data economy and remote work applications of the UAE, and a young global leader at the World Economic Forum. Your Excellency, let me start with you, because I think if there is one word that was repeated in every single one of the 30 councils that met here, it's artificial intelligence. And there have been very different views. There are many that have spent some of that time thinking through how useful applying artificial intelligence would be to solve some very specific issues in each one of those areas, and others who are very concerned about some of the challenges. You are the first Minister of Artificial Intelligence in the world, and you obviously have a very strong perspective on how to manage those challenges and how to leverage those opportunities. Please tell us more.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure being with all of you today, and I'd like to thank the Forum for its continuous partnership to choose the UAE to host such an esteemed group of people. I think this session comes at a very timely period in my life, and specifically in my career when it talks about artificial intelligence, because right before coming here, I was actually extremely scared. It was the very first time that I saw where AI can go wrong and what it means. I used to have a very nuanced view, maybe a view that focused on being neutral when it comes to governing this technology and not over-governing and being proactive. But this afternoon, actually at around noon, I received a message from a friend who spoke to me the way that he always speaks to me, who said to me, it's been a while, let's catch up soon. Bill Gates asked me to reach out, and this person does know Bill Gates. Said, Bill Gates asked me to reach out, and there's a program that we want to do with the UAE. Are you interested? And I said, absolutely, let me know how I can help. And then he said, let me speak to Bill and come back to you. So he said, Bill agreed. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation will invest $250 million into the UAE, and Bill will speak to the president. And if you don't mind, can I connect you with Bill's team? Now, the whole conversation continued on, and it seemed extremely legitimate. It's exactly the way he speaks. It's exactly how I talk to him. And everything seemed like it was absolutely ordinary, until he told me to wire $86,000 to a consultancy firm in China that was doing the due diligence for Bill Gates. And right before this point, for the last 6 years, I always thought, they're going to get everyone, but they're never going to get me. Because I've seen it all, I've been through it all. And this was the very first time where I felt, okay, I could have fallen for that. It's getting really, really good. Now, what also happened was this person sent me a video of himself on vacation in Costa Rica. And he was saying, wish you were with me. He never ever sent me a video of himself, which threw me off a little bit. But it looked really like something he would do. My point on this is I think we're already too late. I think that we've been talking about the hypothetical scenario. We've been talking about the need to govern AI. The same way we've been talking about the need to solve the climate issue from the 1980s. And we finally agreed on 1.5 degrees in the 2000s. It took us 20 years. We can't wait for 20 years for this to happen. Our view in the UAE is if you're proactive, you tend to be more light-touched rather than heavy-handed. If you work with the private sector, you ensure that innovation does not get hindered. My rallying call to everyone is we need to start. We're already extremely late.
Thank you. Very powerful call to action for all of us, and of course, connected to many of the topics that have been discussed here. Lauren, let me turn to you next, and maybe for this first set of questions, reflecting back on the last couple of days and on the work of your council, what were some of the key takeaways, including for you personally?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having us and the opportunity to reflect on these issues. I think the Council on Data Equity is a lot like some of the conversations that have happened with AI or with technology policy, in that they are cross-cutting across many of the specific issues that that the councils are dealing with. And one of the things that I felt an urgency around doing was, how do we define data equity? What does that look like? If we all agree that an equitable, inclusive world is what we want to do, and we need equitable and representative data on which to make decisions, what does that look like? And I think one of the things that I took away from the very rich conversations that we had both inside our respective council, and many thank you to my colleagues for making the last several days such a rich discussion, as well as across the councils, was that in order to reach this state where we felt like data was actionable and equitable, it was actually, data equity was a response to the known challenges that we have. And so we started from this point of action of saying we must go forward, and there are things that we need to be doing in order to make sure that this technology that is so powerful and has so many promising opportunities doesn't lose humanity at its center, because at the end of the day it will affect all of us in many different ways, in both positive and negative. So I was really moved by the notion of action orientation with a clarity of vision, and really thinking about how do individuals experience and benefit and be protected from both the very positive outcomes that we see and the potential risks that we know. On a personal level, as a nonprofit that works on data science and AI for social impact, that bringing us back to that point of being action-oriented for positive outcomes so that individuals and communities can thrive, and that we can use technologies to address some of the inequities that we know exist so that those benefits are more broadly distributed, was a really powerful, inspirational moment, knowing that there's still a lot of work to be done, but knowing that we feel like we can move in a direction that will be net positive.
Thank you. Can I ask you just a follow-up question there? I mean, your organization helps convert hope to reality when it comes to actually using data science for social good. Tell us a little bit more about examples. How has that been done?
Let me see if I can come up with 3 quick examples. We recently did some work in partnership with the IMF to start to help the IMF do a census around the built environment of the world so that we can do better planning on how climate change will affect countries. So the IMF can go back to countries and say, these are places where your built environment is at risk. And while it's not next week, we do need to start to think about how will we plan for that and mitigate that. We've done some work with universities in the United States in looking at student patterns and what predicts the successful completion of college, and worked with some colleges that frankly had relatively low graduation rates, but raised those graduation rates 30% over 2 years just by applying predictive AI so that the resources that were existing for students could be better utilized. And then we're now working with, there's an enormous amount of historic data around humanitarian response, but that data is sometimes difficult to access and difficult to integrate, and certainly difficult to do on a real-time basis, and using large language models to start to pull that data out so that humanitarian organizations and responding organizations can be better prepared and better coordinated so that the scarce resources that we have available are more impactful in times of crisis.
Thank you very much. Neely, I'd like to go to you next. Over the last couple of days, your council has spent a lot of time thinking through philanthropy for climate and nature. Tell us a little bit more about those deliberations and also your personal takeaways.
Sure, thank you. For me personally, I am really motivated by a sense of finance as a principal lever for addressing the climate challenge. And when you think across the councils and you think about all of our shared global goals, financial capital is needed to achieve all of them. When you look at the climate transition specifically, estimates suggest that it'll cost $5 to $6 trillion per year between now and 2050 to be able to achieve it. And so when you look at the challenge at this scale, first of all, this means that the lion's share of the capital that's provided will actually come from the private sector, but the capital needs to be de-risked in order for the private sector to move the amount of money that needs to be moved. And this is what the work of our council is about. We're really focused on the role that philanthropy can play in the capital stack with public sector capital, with capital from MDBs and IFIs, and then also with private sector capital to be able to address this challenge. And so when you think about the public-private philanthropic partnerships, another thing that we think is really important is to be able to move money where it's most needed, not just to think about scale in its own right, but to think about getting to scale through leverage. And so some of the pillars that our group is most focused on at the outset are things like energy transition, industrial decarbonization, food systems, and nature. And these are, in our analysis, points of leverage not only where bringing philanthropy into the capital stack can make a difference, but that you can create leverage to find needed change across the ecosystem more broadly.
Thank you. I'd also like to ask you a follow-up question. You've mentioned in the past that we need to align our decarbonization goals with our social goals to make this shift a reality. There were a lot of conversations here about how to make this transition much more equitable. Tell us how you think about that challenge.
One of the things that's been so great about this meeting is getting that reminder constantly. One council will say what it's working on, and the other council will say, well, don't forget about the equity issues, or don't forget about the issues that we're working on in our council. Don't forget about our region. And so these types of interdisciplinary convenings and conversations, I think, are critical to how we do this work. And it's partially because, in a way, as a society, as institutions, we organize ourselves in silos. But the system that we're trying to address is not in silos at all. It's a system. Everything is interconnected and interdependent. And we need to organize ourselves also as an ecosystem to be able to address the challenge as it is. And so when you think about the way that social topics are connected with climate and environmental goals, it's not only that keeping our social focus is the right thing to do, right? It's the moral thing to do. I actually believe that it will be impossible to address the climate challenge without addressing social inequity issues at the same time. For one thing, when we talk about going to where the emissions are going to where the vulnerability is highest, it's also in places that have some of the greatest social needs and where we've seen more inequality. And so if you speak with these communities about climate and environment, they may have other things on their mind. They're thinking about human development. They're thinking about how to get power at all, not just how to decarbonize it. So that's one thing. And then in general, in many societies, we also need the political will of communities. We need their votes to be able to maintain the long-term momentum to get the support in government and policy that we need. So when we speak in our council, and when we speak across our councils, this type of interdisciplinary thinking is something that we have been making, and I think we all need to continue to make kind of an integral, indispensable part of how we operate.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Reshma, the last couple of days, speaking especially of the social side of things, one of the words that has come up over and over, and especially so in the very challenging set of series of crises or polycrises that the world has faced, is time poverty. Time poverty for leaders, but time poverty for all of us. And the care economy and acknowledging unpaid work is a big part of that. So tell us more about your councils for the last couple of days and your personal takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is we do not value the time of women. Just don't. And I think part of so the Care Economy Council is a new council. And during the first day, many of us had walked in and we had had conversations with people at breakfast or at lunch, and people would say, well, what council are you on? And we would say, care. And their eyes would just go blank, right? And so we started this conversation with, well, why is that? And why do people not see yet that care is fundamental to the functioning of an economy? And our goal as a council is to take an issue that sits in the margins and bring it into the mainstream, especially for an audience especially for this audience. And I think about my own experience of how I came as a social entrepreneur to lead this movement. So I had spent the past 12 years of my life building an organization called Girls Who Code, where we taught over 500 million girls to code around the world. I started the pandemic as the mother of my second child. My first child was 6 years old. And I was running one of the largest women and girls organizations in the world. And then the pandemic hit. And I found myself having to take care of a newborn baby, homeschool my 6-year-old, and save my nonprofit from being shut down. And you saw millions of women in the United States alone, 11 million women get pushed out of the workforce because schools shut down and daycare centers were shut. And what I saw in particular with my students, of which half are under the poverty line and half are from underserved communities, was that so many of them were on their way to go major or minor in computer science or engineering, but because their mothers were essential workers, instead of going to school, they had to stay home and take care of their siblings. You saw how this generational cycle of poverty happens for girls, for women, all across the world. Because most women across the globe live in countries that have a broken structure of care. So even in my own nation, the United States, the wealthiest nations in the world, We are the only industrialized nation that doesn't have paid leave. 1/4 of women go back to work 2 weeks after having a baby. We are the wealthiest nation that invests the least into childcare. Right? 40% of parents in the United States are in debt because of the cost of childcare. We also have the most educated population of women who have the least amount of participation in the labor force. And the reason for that is because 2/3 of women are both doing the care work and they're working. And so we're forced to do this balancing act of between becoming a mother and a worker. And if we're working to work because the cost of childcare is both expensive and unavailable, what happens? We leave the workforce, right? And so we are on a constant hamster wheel fighting our way towards gender equality, and we love to get into conversations about what do we need to do to support women to be at the top of their game, and we think that the solution to that is getting a mentor, you know what I mean? Or color coding your calendar, right? Or getting on a fast track on a bus corner off. We tell women that you're the problem. If only we could fix you, we would get to equality. When in reality, the thing that we all have to fix is the structure. The broken structure of care, which in our case is paid leave, childcare, pay inequity. The minute you become a mother, for every child that you have in the United States, you lose 4% of your income. When you become a dad, you get 6%. So it's not that we sometimes don't value care. We don't value the person who's providing the care, i.e. the mother. And so I'm on a mission, my members and on my council are on a mission to really changing this conversation and elevating it so that next time we come to Dubai and we say, what council are you on? And we say, care. You say, can I join? Right? You don't think I'm talking about an LLM. You know exactly what care is and how it functions in the economy and how it leads to GDP and how it leads to higher productivity and how it leads to a more educated workforce, how it leads to a higher sense of well-being, how it sits at the center of everything. And that is the opportunity and the task and the challenge of our council.
Thank you. Thank you. We've talked about artificial intelligence. We've talked about data systems and data structures. We've talked about financial systems and a specific focus on equity and aligning climate with social goals. We've talked about the social infrastructure that needs fixing. And a lot of these topics, to some extent, will come together at COP28 in just a short period of time here in the UAE. And Badr, you've been appointed as the Special Representative for Business and Philanthropy, and you're chairing the first ever Business and Philanthropy Climate Forum that will take place at COP28. Tell us a little bit more about how your aspirations for that moment connect to what you've seen in the last couple of days, and in general, what you're hoping to achieve there at COP28.
Thank you, Sadia. So just a quick observation with the Philanthropy Council making up 1/3 of the stage, I think WEF is signaling what some of the coolest councils are, so go Nili. Just saying, thank you. So again, really thank you to WEF for bringing us all together. I do think it's very important to just take a step back and ask ourselves why. Right? Why bother? Why do we bother coming here to talk about and debate over days, and not just at this forum, at Davos and any of these global gatherings, to debate and discuss some of these big ticket challenges in the world? Surely it's to safeguard the well-being of humanity and our habitat, starting with our most vulnerable. And I think this is especially pertinent as we all observe some of the incredible suffering taking place this past week in particular, with some of the most vulnerable, really, and voiceless children, women, and men in the world. So putting humans, really, and humanity at the center of everything that we're doing, I think, is more critical than ever. And think about it, and now I'm speaking more figuratively. If your house is burning, how can you expect someone to take notice of changing their roofs to solar panels, or even to think about what it means to keep temperature rises less than 1.5 degrees by 2030. They're just thinking about how to survive another day, another hour. So this is really at the core of what Nili was talking about, which is we can no longer separate, now we're bringing back to climate, we can no longer separate the climate agenda from the human development agenda, and for that matter, the nature agenda as well. It can no longer be a zero-sum game where we're trying to progress one at the expense of another, because that simply won't fly. It just won't fly. And as we've seen, and as Nili mentioned and others mentioned, we have large parts of the world's population today addressing immediate needs and challenges, not just the 800 million people in the world who still don't have access to electricity, or the 2.4 billion people in the world who still don't have access to clean cooking fuels. So this is the opportunity, and that is in itself why COP28 needs to be that connector, that trust builder, bridging the trust divide that has existed, not just in climate and nature, but also within the climate and nature debate and discourse. So the inclusivity piece is really what underpins everything that COP28 will strive and towards achieving, and of course represents. Now, the business dimension is, I think, particularly important, because if we look and try and understand over a period of, 28 years or 27 years, why we haven't made the progress that we set out to back in 1995 when we started this COP process. Today we're sitting with global emissions 50% higher than they were back then. Try and analyze some of those issues and those challenges. There are, of course, a number of them, and I won't go into all of them unless you all brought your pajamas. But one key one is, of course, that connectivity issue. And business really, and philanthropy, can be and needs to play that role of connective tissue between COP presidencies. We have seen, of course, again, COP has fundamentally and traditionally been about negotiated outcomes, and which is very, very important and extremely important to move the needle. But why is it that it feels like we've had many more announcements and accords and perhaps less action and implementation? It's perhaps because business perhaps hasn't been as engaged and involved as it can and needs to be. And similarly with philanthropy, and this goes back to the discussions we've been having in our council, philanthropy, leaving aside the quantum dimension, it's often touted as perhaps not being large enough to make a difference. We know that's not the case. Philanthropy, from what we can measure today, is easily north of $1 trillion, more likely to be $2 trillion a year. But it's the quality of that capital, as again has been mentioned, really being far more equitable in its deployment, far more nimble, far more risk tolerant. And that is really why philanthropy can be, I think, that glue that binds business capital with government capital to help to create that multiplier effect on impact. So, as you mentioned, the COP presidency will host the Business and the Business and Philanthropy Climate Forum. The first 2 days of COP really in parallel with the World Climate Action Summit, or the Leaders Summit, to demonstrate that we can no longer see, again, these challenges through a siloed approach, as Nili had mentioned, and really embrace that multi-stakeholder approach that WEF has been championing since 1971, all coming together on the same platform to co-create solutions to our interconnected challenges. And I think the UAE really, as a host, has a unique opportunity to help to connect across sectors and across geographies to see that as a reality.
Thank you very much. In the same way that you said that we can no longer separate the climate and human development agendas, I think one of the things that really came to the fore at this meeting, Minister Al-Olama, is we also can no longer separate how fast technology is accelerating and its human impact. And I was struck by two completely different conversations around this. There was one set of conversations that we should not worry too much about the impact of, especially AI, on the workforce, and largely we're talking about augmentation of people alongside what they do, and we should spend more of our time thinking through how that will take place and how we'll invest in the right kind of upskilling for people. And there was a completely different conversation that talked about how in some years, maybe a couple of decades, we might be looking at a world where AI has displaced most jobs, and we will have to think very differently about how we spend our time. Differently doesn't mean good or bad, but differently about how we spend our time, where identity comes from. Tell us your views on this matter.
I think both views here have some sense of truth. Um, if you look at how AI has already augmented your lives, or everyone in this room, including myself, every question we ask and every answer we seek is most probably given by an artificial intelligence rather than a human today. You go on Google to search. Every direction that you look for, you get from Google Maps, or all the content that you consume are on different AI platforms. Even our communication today is dictated by artificial intelligence engines. I think it is no longer a hypothetical future that we're going to live. The difference is, if you look at something like social media has impacted our lives in a positive sense. We are more connected. We are able to actually start businesses and sell without having to use any medium. You can directly go on social media platforms and sell your product. And to a certain degree, we're more informed. And I say to a certain degree because it depends on which echo chamber you're in. You're either more informed or less informed. Now, there's also the other side of social media, the polarizing side, the way that people are using that to manipulate you psychologically. And we're just getting started with that. Now, in general, I think both views take I don't know what's the right word here, but they assume that governments are going to stay stagnant, which I think is not going to be the case. Second is, I think, depending on the challenge that you foresee, your reaction is either going to be a lot more aggressive or a lot less aggressive. So if you think about AI broadly, what will AI do to a country like the UAE? I think it's going to completely transform the UAE as we know it, in a positive sense. There are going to be negatives for sure, but we'll need to overcome it. And because of the agile policy systems that we have here, we're going to benefit a lot from it. Now, when you look at countries where just one job class has tens of millions of people working in them, or a few million people, then the displacement there is a lot more drastic. What we're doing about it is the question I'm being asked a lot, is we gave this much thought, and this is how we're going about it. The first is we don't want to wait for AI to displace jobs. We don't want it to affect people's lives negatively. So we are actually announcing a program called the 3R program: reskill, retool, and retire. Now we're looking at the retire side, because most of the times I say retire, people just open up their eyes. And the idea of this program is, if people are going to be in a job class that's going to be completely displaced by AI, you need to provide government programs that will completely reskill them in a new job class that's not going to be affected. And this requires a lot of work from the government as well as from different partners to ensure that you're able to forecast it well. If someone is going to be augmented by AI, you want to retool them to actually allow them to use these tools. And if someone is a year or two away from retirement and they don't want to actually be reskilled or retooled, they just want to enjoy the rest of their lives, they have the option of retiring early. And in that sense, you actually give people the choice. You want to join this revolution as a creator, or you want to just take a back seat and see it take place. You have both options. Now, it's going to take some time. I think there's a lot of lobbying that needs to happen. But we need to ask these hard questions, because using the traditional models of government to work on the future of artificial intelligence is not reasonable. Just one final thing I want to say here is, people talk about hallucination of LLMs as one example of it being negative, right? And the impact it's going to have on education. Will students actually do the research, or will they go on LLMs and just type the prompt and that's it? I am of the view that these systems are extremely positive for education, especially if we completely transform our educational system. So if, instead of depending on multiple choice exams, underpaying teachers, using the same agriculture-based teaching methods that we've had for the last 300 years, you approach AI in the education system, yes, it's going to be disruptive and it's going to be negative. However, if you say that the teacher is a mentor or a guide that actually works with the students to find the answer, that these tools are going to be made available, and if they hallucinate, it's up to the student to actually really dig deep into the content to understand it. And we want to ensure that people are the most informed and the most engaged in the classroom. We're going to have a complete transformation.
Thank you. I want to follow up quickly on the point around, that was very forward-thinking policy making and the 3 Rs. We don't have that kind of agile policymaking everywhere. And to your point, with technology moving so fast, governments need to do things very differently. Do you see some transferability of the lessons and the learnings and the experiments that are happening here in the UAE?
Absolutely, but I do think that this is going to be a unique challenge depending on the geography. I also think that today the urgency that we're seeing with the different parties, so I'm in the World Economic Forum's AI Governance Council, I'm actually also part of a few other efforts. Having these efforts is a definite positive. I think also if we think of a uniform view to govern AI or to operate in the space of artificial intelligence, that is a non-starter, in my opinion, because there are two things that you need to think about. Did we govern electricity? So if you look at the use of electricity, and electricity, by the way, is a lot less capable than artificial intelligence in terms of its impact on our daily lives. We didn't govern electricity. We actually governed certain use cases, certain services that were provided, how people interacted with this the revolution, which is the electrical revolution. We need to think about artificial intelligence in the same way. We need to govern certain verticals of it. We need to not lose sight of the end game. And when I was first appointed in 2017, I remember going to the United Nations in 2018 and participating in the UN General Assembly, as well as Davos and a few other conferences. All of the conversations revolved around self-driving cars and the trolley problem. Okay? Every conversation. That a car had to choose between 3 young people and 1 old person, what would it choose to do? And everyone was saying that the technology is not going to progress unless we answer this question. We did not answer the question. This technology moved on. And people's interests as well moved on. Everyone's talking about LLMs today. How do we ensure that when there is interest, we see progress? That when there is a question that needs to be asked, there is action that follows. And that's what matters to me in the UAE. And that's what I think should matter to everyone in this room and out of this room. How do we take the current challenge that we're faced with, which is LLMs, and actually put a tangible roadmap with tangible outcomes and certain milestones that we all agree with and agree on to come up with a solution before the technology evolves? Because every time it evolves and we lose interest, I think everyone loses out. We have a big challenge with misinformation. We have a big challenge with deepfakes. And I think there's another challenge that most people don't comprehend or actually even know. Your brains are going to be attacked by these systems. As they get better at manipulating us, as they collect more data, as they interact with people more, we are going to be manipulated completely by these tools. We are not seeing that yet. We're thinking about losing our jobs. But what if every time you buy a product, you don't actually want to buy that product, you're being manipulated to do it? It's already happening on e-commerce sites. I don't want to ring the doom and gloom bells here, but the truth is, when you go to buy a product and you end up buying 10 and realizing, okay, I can't make ends meet for some reason, this is an artificial intelligence working on your brains and your psychology. When you even sometimes want to go on Instagram or any of these social media platforms, and you suddenly realize, you know what, I've never seen a restaurant that is popping up in front of me, and I think I should invite Mr. or Mrs. X to that restaurant. In most cases, this is a manipulation that's happening to you. And if you just go on the dark web, there's a good example that I want to share. So there's a group on the dark web, and I'm not trying to promote the dark web in any way here, so don't see it, but you can do your research. There's a group on the dark web called Group 66. And this was a very interesting example of the use of LLMs and AI that sell you a bot. And what that bot does is if you are a restaurant owner or if you are a business owner, you can buy each bot for around $15. And that bot is going to create a social media profile to go on the dating website, create a generated picture of a woman or a man, make someone fall in love with it, and then invite it to your restaurant, the restaurant of the owner who actually owns this bot, and make it order, or make him or her order the most expensive dish. After they order the dish, and you confirm that you received the order and that you actually gave the dish, it will say, I'm really sorry, this wouldn't work. I think I made a mistake, and delete the account. Now, this is manipulation. It's impacting people directly. It is already happening, and no one's doing anything about it. So we need to, again, I think, move much quicker. We need to be very pragmatic, and we need to look at things in milestones rather than in hypothetical questions and very open deadlines.
Thank you very much. Speaking of that call to action and making change fast, I'd like to give the remaining time to each one of the panelists, so you're ready, for one call to action. And I know with the diversity of everything that you do, you could probably ask us for many, many calls to action, but I'm going to give each of you one. And Reshma, let me start with you.
All right, one. I'm going to pick this one because my father's in the room. My parents came here as refugees from Uganda in 1973. And because, both of them were working so hard to put food on the table and make sure that we were taken care of, both of them did their equal share of unpaid labor. My father did my laundry, he did the dishes, he picked me up from school, he did a tremendous amount of caregiving. And that really helped shape my worldview. So my one call to action for all the men in the room is to change the balance of care in your homes. Do a load of laundry tonight, do some dishes, do a piece of unpaid labor and really make a commitment to figure out how you can change the unpaid labor and give women their time back.
Thank you. Neely.
So in the climate community, we talk about how to bring the future to the present. We have goals that sound long-term, but they're also urgent. And so my call to action is to use your view for the long term to find ways to incentivize immediate short-term action. In our Global Future Council, we talked a lot about how do we lay the groundwork to set the frame for the long term, but start taking actions today to be ready for COP28, to be ready for Davos, to be ready for 2030. And this is what I urge everyone in the room and those who may be watching to think about also.
Thank you. Father?
So just to keep it simple, but not to dilute the importance of this one, which I mentioned at the start, is to just keep humanity front and center of everything that you do, really. Otherwise, what's the point?
So I could not have said that better. And thank you. At the end of the day, all of this is about the humanity. I will add one thing as we're thinking about humanity at the center. If we are going to benefit from this incredible technology, AI and otherwise, that has been created by brilliant minds all around the world, we have to use it for the betterment of us all. We cannot miss the opportunity to right the fact that all of us have not always been reflected in the development and the utilizations of these technologies up until now. There are fairness and justice issues that we can address, and as we are marching down this path of progress, I hope that we are all asking today, at the beginning, now, in the middle, and not waiting until later to say, who have I not included in this conversation, and how do I use these technologies to build a more just and inclusive community for all of us in the future?
Thank you. This has been such a rich conversation, just 1 hour. And if we think about the 450 people that were here and the hours that were spent in many, many conversations, a lot of really important outcomes. Many of those outcomes will go into the multi-year work of the World Economic Forum's 10 centers. And they will be taking forward many of the ideas generated here, many of the communities embedded into the work of those centers. Second, a lot of these ideas will be going into the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in January 2024 as global leaders gather together and address some of the challenges, but also take inspiration from many of the ideas that have been generated here. Third, for those of you in our public audience, we will be aiming to put together as much as we can, synthesizing briefly many of the ideas that are generated here and putting together that set of thoughts, insights, proposals, priorities from 30 councils and putting that together into an insight report that you should all be able to access in the next couple of months. Now, there's only 4 things that I have to do. 1, thank you to our panel, Minister Al-Olama, Reshma, Neeli, Badr, and Lauren. Big round of applause for them. Thank you to all of you, the members of the councils that were here, that spent so much of their time and energy, that gave us your latest thinking, your ideas, and that did it all in the spirit of collaboration and making progress on the many challenges that the world faces. Thank you to all of you. I would also like to take the chance to thank our hosts, Minister Al-Olama, certainly, Minister Gergawi, our colleague Ruqayya Al-Balushi, and the full team at the Prime Minister's office for their continuous partnership on many areas, and in particular in hosting this meeting. Thank you to the United Arab Emirates. Among those many generous hosts, thank you also to the Dubai Future Foundation and all of the work that they have done to support us as well. Thank you. And finally, I would like to thank the team at the World Economic Forum, the many, many council managers that have ably led you through the conversations of the last couple of days, our Knowledge Communities team, our Knowledge Communities team, our global programming team, our events and operation teams, our security teams, the many people that have, I hope, made this experience positive for you. Thank you so much to all of you, and see you next year.